Hey guys, Matt Jones in Melbourne. In fact, inside the quite amazing building, which is the Shrine of Remembrance. And today is 3rd of January. It's the third day of this 100 Days to Harvest, day 3 of this narrative, just looking at the friendship between Australia and Korea. The reason I've come here, it's a beautiful building, quite impressive. You know, it's full of great stories. This wonderful sculpture here for the Second World War. It's perhaps one of my favourite sculptures in Australia. Actually, it's got 6 servicemen carrying the body of a colleague on a stone board. I think George Allen was the sculptor. Very amazing. But look, the reason I come here in relation to Korea is the Korean War is seen quite often as, you know, one of the key threads within this tapestry of friendship, the story of friendship, excuse me, between Australia and Korea. And this is one small remark here on this memorial with the name Korea and the dates 1950, 1953. And much like most of the things in this memorial, for all of the guides who do a great job and the way it's beautifully presented, the story of the Korean War is very, very poorly told. And it's poorly told particularly I think by politicians who will often bask in the fanfare of a commemoration or a tour of veterans of the Korean War, but they'll know snippets of the story. Look, we can't expect them to know everything, but I guess the problem is the Korean War is, some of you might know, is referred to as the Forgotten War. And I don't know that we've really done much to improve upon that, and there's a lot more we could do. And it's interesting in this sort of this segue between the beginning of the story, which was the early missionaries who first went to Korea, the first Australians that we know of in 1889, and now the strong record of business engagement between Australia and Korea, and engagement on different social issues. But the Korean War is really important to this story, and it's a story that ought to be told with some respect because of those people who were affected in great ways through the loss of their loved ones. And I mean, I don't think any words I can say can really encapsulate what that must mean for those people, because it would be such a personal loss, so fundamentally big that we can make sense of it by reading, by looking at monuments, but it must sort of cut to the quick so much for those people. But the Korean War is the story of the Korean War is told generally poorly, both by Australians and Koreans alike. That is a generalisation. Well, here's the name Korea mentioned one more time. As a generalisation, and there's so much of the activity where Australian servicemen, Army, Navy and Air Force fought in Korea. So many battles that were effectively almost redundant in the way they were conducted, and there I'm referring to a lot of the trench war and the patrols that sought to snatch prisoners, particularly during 1952 and 1953, that were pretty much fruitless and often resulted in the loss of Australian lives and Australian missing in action. So far from this being a story about the fanfare about what Australia did during the Korean War, the great story of Kapyong, or the great story of Marion Sang, or these other narratives that are generally known of, but perhaps not told to their fullest extent, I think it's appropriate that we at this introduction of the story to pause and just recognise that this story has not been told as well as it could be, and that institutions like this and other memorials across Australia could do a lot more, a lot better at representing the needs of veterans from the Korean War. And I recall back to a conversation I had with two gentlemen in Busan in October, and one of them provided a very frank assessment of what it was like for him coming back to Australia. He'd been involved in an attack in early July 1952. That was pretty much it was an attack that had mixed results. It's not a story that will be told with the fanfare of things like Kapyong, but he describes how he came back to Australia and just melded back into society. Since that time, since 1952, he's had no contact with anyone he went to Korea with, no veteran organisations, and yet politicians and other people are very happy to crow about the service of these veterans and what they've done. But we're missing the human story, and we're missing telling the real story of the human cost, both to the families and the soldiers who served during the Korea. I think we really owe it to them if we're going to talk about the story of friendship between Australia and Korea and lean upon this story of the Korean War. We've got a lot more ground to cover before we get this story right. It's probably not what people want to hear about the Korean War from me, but having just walked through the memorial, look, it's really nice, it's lovely, but I think that there's a lot more room for telling stories across the board. And let's hope we can do that during this 100 days to harvest as we tell the story of Korea and Australia friendship. More soon.